This pilot is Ricky Martinez. He is one of the fastest pilots I have ever seen fly. He is on Team Racecraft. He's as fast as Night Fury or Luke Bannister or all of the top pilots. They are all very close to each other. He spent a day at the track in Ventura, and these are his two best lap times on these two quads that he has been recently testing. He has a bunch of others. He's been testing a lot of stuff lately. And this is a really good example of disk loading and proving the theory that I'm going to be talking about right now. This time I have notes. This is a really good one. So the video you just saw, people are probably going to dispute and say, oh, DVR footage is not accurate timescale, which is true, but in this case, it really does look accurate. And the day that Ricky was at the track, the people that were also there watching him thought that the lighter one was about 5 to 6 seconds faster on average than the bigger, heavier one, regardless of thrust or anything else. So, I mean, that alone is enough for me to say that that video is accurate as you watch it, and it really doesn't look faster or slower. It just looks correct. The disk loading theory. I know I made that video on heavier quads are faster as an reply to Joshua and Stu, but I recently figured out, not recently, a couple days after I posted that, I figured out that what I presented was actually incorrect. I'm not really going to go into it, but for the most part, heavier quads don't even cruise faster. They are just not faster in any way, and a couple people pointed that out in the comments, and I'm just not going to go into it anymore because it's just, they're not faster. It was a dumb thing to even discuss. I have to apologize to Brian Morris, Ricky, and other just, top pilots that already know this stuff, because I'm kind of letting a secret out that if you use it correctly and you know what you're doing, it can really help you be a lot better on a race setting, and this theory was actually made aware to me by Brian Morris originally. So he is the most to thank for all of this. Actually, a lot of my knowledge comes from him, just discussing little things here and there with him. And here's the disk loading theory. So the disk loading theory is just another way to quantify the performance of the quad. And you can use it to quantify between builds that you're planning on doing, and also between builds that are, at the track. If you want to quantify and say, okay, well, this quad is going to perform better than that other quad, so if, you can take that into account and do whatever you need. All right, so here's what it is. So before, we would look at thrust to weight, and we would make predictions based on, geometry and prop and whatever, and that's okay. After you do it for a while, you get a sense of what's what and what's better and what's not. But I'm going to present to you the disk loading theory, which only looks at the all-up weight divided by the prop disk area. Okay, so that means, to have better performance, you have to have a bigger disk, a bigger prop disk, as well as a lower weight, and that makes sense. And I'm going to tell you right now that weight matters more than any other single factor at all. It doesn't matter if you're using crappy motors, crappy battery, crappy ESCs, crappy everything. It's just better. The lighter quad, the flight controller has a much easier time managing a lighter quad. Forget about CG, anything else. It's going to perform way better. It's going to carry less inertia. It's going to go faster in the straight, and it's going to go faster in turns because it can actually go through turns. It doesn't have to stop and then go. It can just turn. That being said, the quality of your parts and all the other stuff that we know, it's still there. I'm just telling you that weight matters more than anything else. Prop disk area is calculated by pi r squared, which is the circumference of a circle, times the number of props that you have. In this case, 4, usually 4. And then you divide your all-up weight by that number, and you get your prop loading number. And a lower prop loading number is better. How much better? Kind of hard to say, but you got to do a couple of quads and test them and try to match real world with your numbers and see and just get a feel for how these numbers work. This theory does not take a lot of things into account. It is just those two numbers, and those two numbers do matter most, the disk area and the weight. But there's other things like the blade area, the actual blade, like a thick blade versus a thin blade. I don't even know if I haven't even tested yet. Well, I have, but A thick tri-blade can perform similar to a quad blade, and this theory is going to predict that a light quad with twin blades will probably perform better than a heavy quad with quad blades. That being said, having quad blades, people have said that it's like having an extra half-inch of blade, so you can try to calculate it that way. I haven't really found a coefficient that works for that kind of estimation, but yeah, that's my best guess there. If you're running quad blades, I would give your number like a heads up, like a plus. If you're running twin blades, I'd give your number like a minus, or handicap, slight handicap. But that's most I have to say about that. Okay, so let's look at the two quads that were in the original video and compare their actual numbers. The heavier quad actually has a thrust to weight ratio of about 13:1. Yeah, pretty high. The lighter quad has a thrust to weight ratio of about 8.8. So we're just going to call the bigger, it's kind of like, we don't really know, because in the air you might get more thrust or less thrust. We'll say it's about that. We can just definitely tell that the bigger quad, the heavier and powerful one, has a higher thrust to weight ratio, and the lighter one definitely has a lower thrust to weight ratio. But if you look at the disc loading numbers, the heavy quad is 6.3 and the lighter one is 4.4. That's the disc loading theory predicts that the lighter quad should be about 29-30% faster. It just so happened that on this track and on this day, we actually saw about 25% faster. That's even if you just go by the estimations that people were making, you're still getting like 22-25% faster, 25% better performance, whatever you want to call it. I'm gonna bet that that would hold consistent across the board on whatever track you put it on, because the lighter one does have a higher top speed, it does turn better, it does everything better. KV isn't really that important in this case, but it does do everything better. So it's just interesting that they were very similar. Okay, so now we had that number, we compared those two quads. Let's compare a list of other quads. Let's, 3-inch, 4-inch, 5-inch, 6-inch. Let's look at these numbers. So this calculation is predicting that a 4-inch should be 30% better performance than the 3-inch. The light 5-inch should be 25% better performance than the 4-inch, and you can read the rest above. So a lighter quad does carry less inertia, and that's another thing that this calculation doesn't take into account fully. And less inertia is just better. You can, pick up faster, you can get out of the turn quicker, you can handle it better in a turn. If you go into a corner with a really heavy quad, it's hard to just, put it on the line and go. Whereas a light quad, if you don't get it perfect, it's really easy to just correct it and keep going, because it just doesn't, it changes direction so fast that you don't really have to, worry about your mistakes. It's much more forgiving to fly. It's easier to fly and it goes faster. But yeah, you can give the heavier quad a handicap over the lighter quad. So the 500 gram 5-inch quad, I would give that a 15% handicap over the 250 gram 3-inch. That will put them very close. So, you give them 20% between the 6.3 and 8.5. It's a very close difference. Give it a little handicap, and they're pretty much the same. They're on the same scale. So a 3-inch can actually be, more than competitive on 5-inch. And recently, I found out that my own 5-inch that I thought was so fast is about the same speed as Brian Morris's 3-inch. So there's another. So as I said before, the performance of your components definitely does matter, but not as much as we previously thought or previously expected. What this calculation will tell you, though, is that you should definitely not be running 2700 kV, 2600 kV on a heavy build. The disk loading theory just says that doesn't work out very well. And if you read the Wikipedia, and there's a couple of the websites that I read, basically they say that increased weight and then high RPM on the disk being loaded, it doesn't work as well in the higher RPMs, so you have to increase the pitch to move better. And there's this whole calculation of, for a helicopter versus a plane, how to balance the pitch and balance the weight of the craft, or expected weight of the craft, to get the best performance and the most efficiency. So basically, it's saying that, don't run high KV on heavy quads. If you're going to run 2700 KV you're on a heavy quad, you're just, drawing more amps for no reason, because the prop can't handle it. And even when I tested the racecraft props on my quad, which is heavy, at 480 grams all up weight for the 5-inch, the props at the top end, I felt them fluttering and like really like dying under the performance of like the high KV, high speed. And on Ricky's quad, they were fine. They didn't care. They were just performing as expected. So I can tell you the Racecraft props are really kind of lightweight props. They're not intended for heavy quads. I mean, they'll perform fine on both, but they're better on lightweight, as any prop would be. Another thing that this theory leaves out is speed. It's really hard to quantify speed, and there's a lot of factors that go into it. In this case, lighter in the same class will go faster, and by class I mean weight and prop size. But basically, speed is governed, for the way I see it, speed is governed by aerodynamics and your terminal pitch velocity. If you're spinning a prop with high pitch faster, and your quad is as light as possible, you can get as close to your terminal pitch velocity, which is going to be your RPMs, your max RPMs, multiplied by your pitch of the prop, and that's going to be your terminal pitch velocity. Whatever you calculate in the air, it's probably a little bit higher in the air than on the bench. And a lighter quad will have an easier time reaching that terminal pitch velocity in the air. You can never reach it because of physics, but you will get closer with a lighter quad. So lighter is going to be faster, and in my opinion, I think 4-inch blades give you the highest chance. 4-inch or 5-inch will give you the highest chance of high speed. I see it as impossible for a 15-inch quad to hit 80 plus miles per hour, given that the blade would have to spin at over 25,000 RPM. Our little blades, our 5-inch blades, spin at about 30,000 RPM, top limit. And a big blade spinning at 25,000 RPM is freaky as hell on a multi-rotor, because that's a lot of stress on the blade, and I have a hard time believing that something that big can get up to 80-something miles per hour with a standard aerial photography drivetrain. Anyways, efficiency also plays a huge role here. Lighter is going to be way more efficient, so you can kind of throw out your comparison between motors of which one is more efficient, which one is generating more thrust for less amps, because the heavier motor weight adds up really fast. So the heavier motor, even though it's more efficient, is killing its efficiency way worse by being heavier. So yeah, you just throw out the efficiency number. Don't even look at motor efficiencies. Within the same motor, same motor size, there isn't enough variation for it to make a difference. The weight is going to, even 5-10 grams more is going to matter more than the efficiency of the motor itself. Prop combination, whatever. It's very complicated, but I'm just simplifying things. Now, the question that you've been probably pondering is, how on earth do you even get to these weights that I've stated on the previous chart? So Ricky's quad is using really old, crappy 2204 motors. These are N42 magnets. The air gap is like a millimeter. It's not a, I mean, it was a performance-built motor back then, but it's, by today's standards, it's hardly a performance-built motor. That motor is 22 grams, and you can probably find 2204 motors at 21 grams. And that is, 22 grams is 6 grams lighter than the next, like the best motor as we know it, which is like a 2206 motor. It's 6 grams lighter. 6 grams times 4, the weight adds up quick. And on top of that, prop weight does too. He's using 3.5, 3.4 gram props versus a Cyclone blade, which is 5.6 grams. That all adds up. All that stuff really does add up. So you can think of that, and then you can also think of 1407 motors for 4-inch, which are 15 grams apiece. And now the 1407 motors are so powerful that they can really push 4-inch blades really well. Regarding the stator size and prop size, the combination of stator size versus the prop size, I'm going to make another video about that. That's also very important, but doesn't really factor into this calculation right now. I'm trying to simplify things as much as possible. Acrobatics is also a totally different game. Doesn't apply, this stuff does apply to performance, but in terms of acrobatics, and we're trying to get smoothness and that kind of performance rather than speed and just track-based performance. That's also a totally different calculation. I would say that on a racetrack, if you are planning on carrying a GoPro, you probably want to be running 6-inch because it's going to perform better overall. Even though the 6-inch is going to have a slower top speed, it will perform better in the turns, which is really where you pass people. And I used to think that races should be classified by prop size and battery voltage. Now I think that prop size shouldn't matter. I think races should be categorized by the weight of your craft, the all-up weight, and the battery voltage. I know that ultimately the pilot does win the race, and consistency usually wins, above everything else. But we're getting to the point that people are becoming very consistent. They're becoming very fast pilots and very good on a track, and it's kind of unfair to race a 500-gram quad against Ricky's 200 and something gram quad with a 350 gram. It's ridiculous. It's like he could just sit there waiting for 20 seconds before he takes off as a handicap, and if he's consistent, he will still beat the 500-gram quad, because that thing is so much faster in a 4-lap race. I mean, there's no competition. If the lighter one would win, it would even last longer in the air, because when you're punching it, it's not pulling as many amps, and the battery is having a much easier time supplying all the amps. Yeah, that's all I have to say for now. I hope you like this one. I was very interested when I actually calculated all these numbers, so I was really excited to present this one to you guys.